Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with Eliza Chat, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world. Today, we're talking about something that feels really present for a lot of people right now, loneliness.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that almost everyone can relate to, right? But very few people talk about this openly. You know, you can be surrounded by people, busy, successful, connected online, and still feel that in your gut, right? Deeply alone.
Yeah, it's ironic. We live in the most connected era in human history, and at the same time, loneliness is an all-time high, because I think true connection is not necessarily the same thing as social media connection. So the paradox is what we want to unpack today.
Right, because loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about not feeling meaningfully connected, and that's a really different thing we'll get into.
Right, it's also not a personal failure, which is important. It's not a weakness. What we're learning from the science is that loneliness is a biological signal, not just an emotional one.
Exactly. It's the body and the nervous system, right, telling us something important is missing. And when we ignore that or, try to power through, it shows up in our mental health, our physical health, and also in our relationships.
So today we want to talk honestly about why so many people feel lonely, even when life looks full on the outside in some cases.
And more importantly, you've heard us talk about, connection to others, right, being a big pillar for mental fitness. So, we want to talk about how connection fits into mental fitness and how essential that is for everything mental fitness offers.
And it's not about quick fixes or forcing yourself to be social. If you're an introvert by nature, it's not saying, and you feel lonely, it's not saying I have to become extroverted in order to overcome this. It's really about understanding what real connection actually is and how we can start rebuilding that in small human ways.
Exactly. So if you've ever felt lonely or, have felt that and thought something's wrong with you, then this episode's for you.
Yeah. So first idea, the paradox of modern connection. So why is loneliness rising despite the availability of technology to connect us? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, the cost of a long distance phone call, we rarely called grandma and grandpa. And if we did, we tried to be very quick. But so even just the cost of connecting, we can connect overseas for nothing. Social media. So there's technology that enables more human connection than any time before, but loneliness is at an all-time high. So why is that, Luke?
Right. Well, it's interesting. It's, they call this the Gen Z paradox. So despite Gen Z being born into this digital world, right? They're digital natives. 80% of Generation Z reports feeling lonely in the past year, compared to, 40% of baby boomers, and then 15% of Gen Z report never feeling lonely. So it's that paradox of, like you said earlier when we were introing this, we're connected more than ever with social media and stuff, but I think it's more about intimacy than visibility, right? And what I mean by intimacy is depth of engagement versus contact. We talked about this on a previous podcast around vulnerability, right? Vulnerability isn't sharing your whole life on social media. It's about having those one or two or three people you can have like meaningful depth of connection with. What do you think, Dave?
Right. No, and not to knock social media. I think social media is a tool and it depends how it's used. I mean, it might have some design flaws in it, but I think social media can absolutely be used to maintain meaningful connections. I know with grandparents and grandchildren or friends, that we don't get to see, that we don't live nearby, it can serve as that. But one of the things, like you mentioned, Luke, the science shows that even if it's just one or two real meaningful connections where we can be vulnerable, we all have to have someone that we can be vulnerable with, that we can just be our honest self. That's not what social media is. Social media is the highlight reel. It's selective sharing. Even if sometimes people get on and share something vulnerable, it's not really it's not really designed that way. The impression that you get from when scrolling through social media is you're seeing the highlights of everyone else's life, and you might have feelings that you're missing out. So again, there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with social media, but it's unlikely that that alone is going to fill that need that we all have for meaningful human connection. So if you're spending significant time on social media, it doesn't matter how many friends you're connecting with on social media, and also feeling feelings of loneliness, there's the paradox there. It may actually be perpetuating the feelings of loneliness, not in any way helping.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, that's kind of a good summary of that paradox of modern connection today. What do you think, Dave, about, when we were researching and looking through literature, loneliness is not only like an emotion, right? That we feel at times, but it's actually a very, very real health issue.
It's crazy. So I guess we could have started this episode with the question, what is more dangerous to your health? Obesity, smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or chronic loneliness? And you might guess, because of what the topic is, it's actual chronic loneliness, that chronic loneliness is more harmful to your health and is more likely to increase all causes of death and thereby shorten your life expectancy than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's more harmful to health than obesity. So it's not just that if you're lonely, you're going to live the same amount of time, but just may not enjoy it as much. That biological need for human connection will actually take its toll, and you will not live, statistically speaking, as long as those with meaningful connections.
Yeah, it was like, what was it, like a 50% increase in link to all cause, mortality risk or something crazy.
Early mortality, yeah, for those that feel isolated. So another stat, a 33% increase in the risk of stroke and 29% increase in the risk of heart disease.
Wow.
Right? It actually made me feel better to say that it's more harmful than obesity. It's like, okay. No, but in all seriousness, it was really surprising. I mean, I believe that if someone said, hey, it's harmful to your health, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But to the extent that someone with meaningful connection smoking 15 cigarettes a day is likely to live longer than someone else, all else being equal in their physical health, who's chronically lonely. That's crazy.
No, it is crazy. And I was super curious, like, why? Like, that's a bold statement, right? And it's also interesting because think of the millions of dollars on billboards, like stop smoking campaigns and stuff, right? That are spent on these huge campaigns, like smoking so bad.
Or campaigns on promote healthy eating and reducing trans fats and all that.
Right. But we're saying loneliness is just as big as an issue. And I started to ask why, right? And kind of dig into the science behind it. And really it's about that loneliness, right? When you have this loneliness, it's a signal to your body, like biological signals, like, hey, something's wrong. You're hardwired for connection. There's this gap between what you're currently doing in your life and what your nervous system and you need biologically, right? Which is what you said, we're hardwired for connection. So when that signal's constantly turned on, it's chronic stress essentially in your body, right? So that chronic kind of inflammation, that stress, that's what increases disease risk in your body.
Yeah, and as we researched this and read that, I was just imagining or internalizing what that means, that meaningful connections actually reduces stress, and I was thinking, gosh, when I come home to all my dang kids in the house, my stress goes up, but it's temporary. It's a different kind of stress. I think that there's still a calm and a peace to having those loved ones in your life. But when you're feeling the absence of that, there is an underlying, maybe undetected, constant level of stress.
Right.
And we all know that the long-term health impacts of chronic stress. And so it's a source of that.
So Dave, if I believe I'm an introvert, am I more likely to be lonely, right? Or do extroverts have the same risk, right? Like, what's your thoughts around introverts, extroverts, self-sufficiency?
Yeah, I think the interesting is that the science that there's a lot of studies, and some of it say that extroverts tend to have higher mood levels typically than introverts and stuff, but introverts find more meaning in their life typically than extroverts. They may have fewer but more meaningful relationships. They tend to have longer and more meaningful marriages and other relationships. It's not just extroverts are the ones that aren't lonely, introverts are the ones that aren't lonely. That's not what it is. Loneliness is not a person. It's not a characteristic of whether you're introverted or extroverted. It's whether you're having an introvert can not feel lonely, and often extroverts do feel very lonely because they have many shallow relationships. It's not knocking extroverts. It's just statistically speaking, those personality traits tend to have more relationships, but each one is shallower, and so both introverts and extroverts can be lonely or not lonely, and you don't need to become extroverted to overcome your loneliness. You may need to get a little bit outside yourself, but not changing who you are fundamentally inside.
I think that's a super important point, right? Because I think a lot of, if any listeners are more leaning towards introverted, I think sometimes you feel like you have to put that mask on of an extrovert, right? In order to like make friends and stuff or do things. And we'll get into the different types of connection here in a minute. But what you're saying basically is it's a preference thing, right? Introverts prefer depth and less volume in connections, one-on-one presence, whereas extroverts may prefer like shared energy. So it's a preference thing, but connection is universal across all personalities.
Right. In fact, I want to see if we can share a video here. So I just want to just show this. This is Arthur Brooks, who teaches a course at Harvard on the science of happiness. And here's him being interviewed and just what he says about introverts and extroverts.
Who's happier, introverts or extroverts?
Extroverts is the classic finding. Tons of studies find that extroverts have more positive affect. They tend to have higher mood, but introverts have special gifts. They have closer relationships. They have deeper emotional connections to other people. And the result of that is that they have long-term friendship and marriage partners that sustain them in a way that extroverts don't. Extroverts often can get really lonely. So extroverts, they tend to get more short-term happiness, and introverts tend to have more long-term happiness. So what you find is that extroverts, they tend to get more enjoyment, and introverts tend to get more meaning.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so it really is it is a preference thing, right? But connection, every human nervous system requires connection, right? So I think we've actually talked about this on many episodes. It comes up as a theme, like humans are hardwired for connection, right? Humans are social mammals by design.
One of the big aha moments when we were talking to Todd Olson in an episode, I think back in October, called Slow is Faster. No, Small is Bigger, Slow is Faster.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that, he talked about how we're the only living thing, the only species of any animal that seeks connection in response to trauma. So the whole fight or flight is what every animal other than humans, the way they respond to trauma or stress. But humans first seek connection, and when human connection fails, then they fall back to fight or flight. And that's interesting. It makes sense. It's like I remember when September 11th happened. I remember being at a conference in New Orleans, and as soon as it happened, I just wanted to call my fiance, and I wanted to call my mom and dad, and I just wanted to connect with people to help process that together. And I think of other times in my life when something big happens, we want to connect with people, not just fight or flight.
Right. What's that saying? You can go far alone, but you can go farther together, right, with other people.
Yeah.
I think that resilience is, what I've come to see is truly relational, right? Like you can, if you're just trying self-improvement to go far in certain areas of your life without that connection, eventually you're going to hit, a peak, right? That you're not going to be able to go past. So you can't do it alone, right? You need that in order to have true resilience. It has to be relational.
Yeah. And I think, just like you said, having someone to go with, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's an intimate romantic relationship. We need emotional intimacy, but if we're single, we can get that from some of our friends or family members. But it does mean that we need to have someone in our life that we can be vulnerable with, and someone that we can connect with. And again, it's not about the number of people, but it's just feeling that you're a part of something and a part of someone else's life.
Yeah. There's the literature also shows like there's three really key types of connection, right? This was eye-opening to me because I've seen me lacking in some of these areas over my life, right? So the three types are intimate connection, right? Kind of what you're talking about. This level of connection revolves a relationship with, your partner, a spouse, maybe very, very close friends, or, an intimate core social circle. And this is, where you can have that true depth, right? You have this core circle. The second is relational connection. So think of like your friend group, right? Like maybe you're 10 to, for those extroverts, 50 people, maybe. Not as frequently contacted, but, a deficit in this area results in relational loneliness. You might have a really good relationship with your spouse, but if you're missing those kind of friendships, that relational loneliness shows up. Then the third is collective connection. You could otherwise say like belonging, right? So this level refers to a sense of community or that belonging in a group with a shared identity, right? So that was interesting to me, these three: intimate connection, relational connection, collective connection. So it's a good kind of reflection for listeners. Out of these three areas, is there any that you're lacking in more than others? Because you could certainly be married and not have an intimate connection, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the difference, connection versus proximity. So people can feel lonely even while they're in a relationship, even someone that you share a home with. And really what it comes down to is your ability to be vulnerable. And if for whatever reason, maybe over the years in a marriage or in other relationships where we maybe become critical of each other and no longer feel safe sharing, when you lose that ability to be vulnerable, then that feeling of isolation, even in the relationship, can creep in. And so many people can feel very lonely, even though they're living with others or have people around them. And likewise, connection isn't the same as proximity. Someone might live alone and live a fulfilled life where they don't feel lonely at all because they have those people in their lives that they can connect with.
Right. So what are some ways then we can rebuild real connection in everyday life, right? What's some realistic next steps if people are feeling this loneliness?
Yeah, this was a cool part for me in our research for this because, I just thought like, okay, we can lay out all the science of what loneliness does to the body, all the statistics about how 1 in 2, I don't think we mentioned this, but 1 in 2 Americans have feelings of loneliness, like half of our country. and that's just crazy to think about. And so we can talk about all that, and then when we talked about how do we solve it, I just like, well, people just need to, get out there and build relationships. But there's more to it than that, and I thought that was what's super interesting is a number of things that we can do. But first, I think it's recognizing that we might have feelings of loneliness, de-shaming it, not feeling like, oh, that means something's wrong, I need to be ashamed of talking about it, and sort of first recognizing that this is an area of my life I need to improve. But from all the research we did, what are some of the things that stood out to you most, Luke?
Yeah, I think the naming is a huge one. We've talked about self-awareness a lot. Like you can't change unless you're aware of it, right? So I think this is continually a problem, especially for middle-aged men, right? I think there's this natural thing as you get older and you have a family, like you're gonna naturally have less connection with people in your life, right? And hopefully you have a good connection with your family. But I went through this myself, and it felt a little weird, like talking to my wife about it, but like, hey, you know what? Like, I feel like I do sense like this loneliness. I see other people with like really strong friends and stuff. So maybe I need to do better at this. I don't really know how to say it, right? But just that, like sharing that with my wife, now she like pushes me out of the house sometimes to go to a social event or do certain things. So I think the first is like being aware, like don't just push past this. Like if you're feeling any type of loneliness, you need to name it. That was one of the biggest things for me.
Yeah. And then we learned about the 15-minute rule. So this is a commitment to just 15 minutes a day of high quality interaction with loved ones. And 15 minutes of undistracted connection is way better than spending, and you might spend the evening with your partner on the couch watching TV while you're both scrolling on your phones.
Right.
And that's not connection. But just 15 minutes of no devices, no distractions, no media, but just getting below surface level conversation, 15 minutes of connection a day is sufficient for deep connection. Just 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's important because that's kind of, you have to lower the bar so connection feels accessible, right? So that's an easy one to feel like you can accomplish. It's not overwhelming, right? To just outline 15 minutes.
All right, this show is all about mental fitness, and here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. If you want to be part of the early access group, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Sign up now and get 3 months free. What about service? This was one that was an interesting one you and I were discussing as we got ready for this.
Yeah.
What did we learn about service? How does service help us? How is it an anecdote to loneliness?
Well, loneliness, when you're feeling it, that signal's going off biologically, like it's very inward, right? Everything is inward. You're thinking inward, right? So service as an antidote, performing those acts of service for others, shift that focus from inward, from self-absorption, right? And feelings of unlikability to that outward orientation, right? So it really is a great antidote for breaking that harmful cycle of loneliness and only thinking inward, right? Which makes a lot of sense when we read that. But
when we were learning this, it took me back to when I was in college. I remember feeling lonely quite a bit when I was in college. And I had roommates, I had friends, I went to class every day with lots of other people, I had study partners. But there were just times where I just didn't feel like, my roommates were all busy in their school, and I just didn't necessarily feel like always. Sometimes I just felt really lonely walking around campus with 30,000 other students, or sitting in a class with 50 other students, or sitting in an apartment with 5 other roommates. And I don't know that I labeled it lonely, but I just remember when I was feeling sad when I was in college, learning that one service was the best way to make myself feel better. Just doing something for someone else. And it was cool as we researched this to kind of come back to that. And then as I reflected, that was actually a very lonely time of my life. Even though, like I said, I was in a social setting all the time, the lack of those deep connections, I was away from my family, right? I was for most of my college time, I was single. So it was a time when I was single, not in an intimate relationship. My family and my very close friends I grew up with were in a different state or city. And so I was kind of by myself, even though I was around a lot of people. But that's when I learned that firsthand, that just serving people. So it was really cool to see not just that this is a good, age-tested advice, that service is an antidote for loneliness, but that the science behind it shows that when we serve other people, we feel a deep connection to the people we serve, even if we don't have direct contact with them. If you mow the lawn for a widow, even if you don't talk to her, just you feel connected to them. And what happens internally when we perform acts of service is incredible in terms of curing and addressing loneliness.
True. And that's something anyone can do, right? It doesn't cost anything. Another interesting area, there was a huge study on promoting well-being just from having a true sense of purpose and meaning in your life, right? The study basically said that completely negates like the negative impact of loneliness, which was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense, right? Having a sense of purpose or meaning in your life, it kind of goes back to, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he was the Holocaust survivor that while serving in the he was in Dachau, while serving in the Dachau prison camp just north of Munich, he developed his logotherapy theories, which he later, after the war and he was freed, he won a Nobel Prize for. But one of his most famous quotes that he kind of realized and recognized in that suffering was, man can endure anything if they can find meaning in it.
Right.
And his meaning and purpose was surviving for his wife and children, and he didn't know they had actually been killed. And had he known that, he says he may not have survived. But if man or woman, people can really endure any amount of trial, trauma, hardship, if they can find meaning in it. And so the way Arthur Brooks says it is, you have meaning in your life if there's something you'd be willing to die for. And it doesn't have to be religion. For most people, it's a religious belief and understanding that there's more beyond this life. But even if you can be atheist or agnostic and still have deep meaning in your life, but there's got to be something that you believe in that's bigger than yourself. I think it's in a way sort of similar to service. Service is like that there's someone else that's bigger than you, and finding meaning in your life is that there's something else that's bigger than you.
No, that's true. Having a strong why in life does a lot of good in all areas, right? Back to, self-awareness. Here's a few just reflection questions for both for us, Dave, and for listeners. So just to think through, because like we said, it's preference as far as like how you're going to connection, how you're going to, work on this loneliness if you feel it. So here's a few questions. When do you feel most connected? Where in your life do you feel unseen? What kind of connection actually nourishes you? And who do you feel safe being honest with? So I think even pause the podcast or rewind a little bit and just think through those questions, because again, practicing that self-awareness will help you map out the types of connection that, one, work best for you, but two, areas you can maybe improve or work on with people around you.
Yeah, I like that second question. Where in my life do I feel unseen? I mean, we didn't really get into this, but there can maybe be parts of your life that feel lonely and parts that don't, right? And often for men, their careers can feel lonely because they can have meaningful connections with their family, but maybe people at home don't connect with them about their career, right? I mean, my kids don't really care what I do for a living.
That's a good point.
They just want me to come home and play with them, right? But understanding that and saying, okay, my family's going to fulfill maybe most of my needs and loneliness, but God, maybe I just need a really good work colleague that I can connect with on an emotional level about my career. And then I like that third question too. What kind of connection? What type of connection is what helps you? And then who? Yeah, we all got to have the who you feel connected with. So those are great questions. I challenge our listeners to listen to that. I think some of the anecdotes, I mean, it's not just an easy fix, but I think that the service, the 15-minute rule, finding meaning in your life, having something that is beyond yourself, and some of that can all be accomplished in, you can join a group where you're a service-oriented group where you're connecting with other people, you're serving, and that can give you a deep purpose. But as we sort of wrap up, I think we want to leave with this, that feeling lonely does not mean you're broken. It means you're human.
Right. And connection is not optional for mental fitness, right? We talk about this a lot, but just like sleep, movement, nutrition, it's something our nervous system requires to function well.
Yeah, and loneliness is not something to fix or eliminate, it's something to listen to. When we feel it, it's our body telling us, it's signaling towards a need for deeper, more meaningful connection.
Right. And that connection might look different for everyone, right? There's no one right way to belong.
Right. What matters is presence over perfection, depth over volume, being seen over being busy.
So if this episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where connection feels strong in your life and where it might be missing.
And if this conversation sparks something in you, consider sharing this with someone you trust and love. Sometimes connection starts simply naming it, what you're feeling, and serving someone by introducing them to the Mental Fitness Podcast.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here and listening and investing in your mental fitness.
And we'll see you next time on the Mental Fitness Podcast.